Hello! Now that you've had time to mull over passing, neighbor, and suspension non-chord tones, let's look at the self-test. Page 202, self-test 12-2. And this is beginning, it asks you to go back to 7-9 on page 100. Okay? So 7-9 on page 100 is an example of a Beethoven minuet. You're to look at it now, all those parentheses that were there before, now you're going to get to analyze them. Play it with me. I believe you would also call that a parallel period. See how the phrases begin with the same material. Okay, let's look at the treble. They ask you in the first measure, measure 1, to analyze. There's one treble note. It's really in thirds, stepping down. So the F and the A flat are not part of the chord. They are passing tones. Okay? Next measure, we have the bass in octaves, stepping up, again, passing tones. Alright? And then in the treble in that second measure, there's a G half note, then it goes up to the A flat and back to the G. So that is neighbor. Go ahead and write that in number 2. You should have number 1 a P, number 2 N, and then for the bass a P. Okay? That takes us to measure 3, and for this you need to play this in both hands, because to get the number of this suspension, you'll see it's a suspension, to get the number you have to have the bass. So picking it up from that neighbor tone, there's your G, which is being held over now, but the G is not part of the chord, that's why it's in parentheses. It goes down to the F, which is part of the 2 minor chord. So, I said it was a suspension. I knew that because there was a G before it, held over on the same note as a non-chord tone, resolving down by step. Okay? The way I get the number, I'm counting up from the A flat up to the suspension, which is the G. That's a 7th, the way we already demonstrated on the board before. And it goes down to the F, which is a 6. So it's a 7, 6. Okay? No matter how far it is away, you go by the bass with the suspension. If you play it by itself, you can hear it. Second phrase, measure 5. Very similar to what we had in the first phrase, passing in the treble. Second measure there, measure 6. So you'll have to distinguish that this is an ascending voice in the treble clef. It's not the B flat, it's the D up to the E flat to the F, so it's passing again, and the bass is also passing. And as you might expect in this parallel period, we're going to have another suspension. Playing on the third beat, so we have an A flat in the 5-7 chord. That A flat is held over, suspended over the 1 chord, the E flat major chord, resolves down to the G. Again, I look at the bass, the E flat, and the A flat, that's a 4th. It's a compound 4th, right? And it resolves down to a third. So you need to write 4-3. You can write it anywhere. I wrote it above the music, but you can write it right by the chord, a 1-4-3. Don't just write suspension though, write the number. Okay? There's another example to do that with, and you'll check that in the back of the book. Now let's look at number 3, just the first phrase. The Bach schmücke dich, o liebe Seele. Okay, let's play this together as much as you can, just the first phrase. Nice and slowly. 3 and 4 and. Play that several times with me if you need to. Let's go back and analyze now. We're in the key of E flat, judging by the key signature, and if it were C minor, I would see B naturals, but I don't. So E flat major, beginning with the 1 chord, right? Then I have this on beat 2, a 5 chord, B flat major. That A flat you could call a 7th. Now you have a choice. You can say a 5-7 there, or you can call it a passing tone. Beat 3, C minor, that's the 6 minor. Beat 4. You might want to analyze this before you continue and then go back and see if you're right. This is the 5, first inversion. 3rd is in the bass, 5-6. Now we're on beat 1 of the 2nd measure. Back to the E flat major, 1 chord, but we have 2 moving parts. Notice that the bass E flat is held, but the tenor is going up and the soprano is going up. Both passing tones. To beat 3, I'm still on the 1 chord, but first inversion, 1-6. Now the bass is moving up, passing. Now what do we have? That E flat isn't part of the B flat chord, is it? So I'm going to look at this. This is a 5 chord. It's a B flat major chord, and the E flat is the suspension. Look at my bass is a B flat, and it stays a B flat against the E flat. So I have a 4 going to a 3. What makes this so interesting is what Bach does with the tenor. He does put the note of resolution in there, but he goes away from it really quickly. He just treats it as a little neighbor and goes back to the F. Okay? Sorry, not the note of resolution. He repeats the suspension note. I said that wrong. E flat suspension, E flat neighbor, and then it does resolve to the E flat on the next chord. So Bach always thinks ahead and makes it beautiful. Alright, so you had mostly passing tones in there with a 4-3 suspension at the end. The last thing I'd like to look at before you tackle some of this in the workbook for homework is part B. And I've put it on the board, just the first measure. You should work through the next 3 measures and check them in the back of the book. So remember, going back to what we talked about how to find suspensions and put them in, first you're going to look for a step downward. And I see 2 places here. In the alto, an F down to E, and in the soprano, a G down to F. So at first thought, it would seem like both of those could work for a suspension. But actually, you can't use the soprano, G to F, because if I held my G over and then resolved down to the F, the note of resolution, the F, would already be present. So do you see I can't use that? There would be no suspense because the F is already being sung in the alto part. But the alto part, this will work very well for a suspension. We're going to hold the first note over. This is the preparation. I erase my E. Remember, it's so nice to do it on the board, but when you're writing them out, remember to line it all up. I'm going to carry my F over again with a tie. You can tie it or just replay it. I like to tie it to see it, and then come down to the E flat. To the E natural. So I have the F preparation, suspension, resolution, and to get my number, I look here at the bass with the F. That's a fourth, and it resolves down to a third, so I'm making this a 4-3 suspension. Okay? Now try the rest of them, check in the back of the book, and then you're ready to do the workbook.